You hear that sound, deep, pulsating, as if the earth is breathing beneath you. You don't know where it comes from, but your body already knows the answer. Goosebumps, a catch in your chest, a beat, not a drum, but a throb in your temple. You think it's magic. You're right. But magic is just science we haven't fully understood yet. And in 1964, in a garage in Trumansburg, New York, Robert Moog was already dissecting it, not in theory but on circuit boards, on resistors, on capacitors, smelling of ozone and hope. He wasn't a musician, he was an engineer, and he believed electricity could sing. Not like a machine, like a human, with a tremor in its voice, with a pause before a confession. Here's how it worked. Imagine the VCO is the vocal cords. It generates a pure wave, seen, sawtooth, square pulse like a heartbeat before a confession, and then the filter, the ladder filter, invented by Moog almost by accident. It didn't just cut frequencies, it shaped the sound like a potter shapes clay. You turn a knob and the sound becomes warm, melancholy, angry, alive. These aren't buttons, it's a pulse. And when Wendy Carlos recorded Switched-on Bach in 1968, the world understood Bach could sound through transistors and sound so captivating that the goosebumps wouldn't fade even after the power was off. But here's the paradox. Synthesizers were considered cold, soulless machines. Yet, in reality, they turned out to be mirrors. The more a musician invested in turning a knob, pressing a key, breathing into a pedal, the more the sound responded with emotion. Listen to the solo in Lucky Man. The notes don't jump. They weep. They glide. Like tears on glass, because glide isn't a function, it's the tremor in hands before a farewell. And then the explosion began. Not slow, instantaneous. By 1973, 80% of hits featured a Moog sound, not a sample, not an imitation. A true analog, warm, unstable, with a noise that didn't interfere but breathed. And by 1975, 13,000 Minimoogs had left the workshop, not for laboratories, not for museums, for stages, for studios, for basements where teenagers first touched the future. You thought it was just an instrument? No, it was the voice of a new age, and it wasn't born in a concert hall. It was born where solder and dreams smelled. In a garage, with one man, and a soldering iron, June 1964, New York, the Audio Engineering Society exhibition. Among the booths with amplifiers and microphones, there's one that looks like a control panel from a spaceship. Green and red lights blink in time with something invisible. Wires hang like tentacles. Behind it, Robert Moog, short-sleeved shirt, glasses, fingers stained with solder. He turns on the synthesizer. A sound erupts from the speakers, not noise, not interference, but a pure sine wave, bent by a filter into something warm, breathing. People walk by. Someone snorts. Amateur radio enthusiast. No one hears the music, but it's already there, in every pulse. You would have heard it. You would have recognized that pulse, because it's in your body. Here's the secret. The Moog synthesizer wasn't an instrument. It was a system, like neural connections in a brain. The generator, VCO, is the vocal cords. It creates the wave. Sine, saw, square. The filter, VCF, is like the throat. It cuts out the excess, leaving the character. The amplifier, VCA, is like the lungs. It breathes, swells, fades. You connect the modules with wires, and the sound changes. Not by program, not by button, by hand. Every connection is a decision. Every knob is a confession. It's not a machine. It's a dialogue. And you are the conversationalist. But here's what breaks the mold. The ladder filter. The very one that made the Moog sound alive, pulsating, almost human. He never patented it. He simply published the schematic in Electronics World in 1965. He gave it away. For free. Competitors, ARP, Roland, Moog cloners, copied it within a week. And you know what? That's precisely why the Moog sound became ubiquitous. If he had patented it, the synthesizer would have remained a toy for the rich, but he gave it away, not out of foolishness, out of belief. A belief that music isn't a commodity, but a language, and language should be free. And then she appeared, Wendy Carlos, not an engineer, not a marketer, a musician. In 1968, she takes this radio remote control and makes it play Bach, not a cover, not an experiment, Bach himself, with precision, with soul, with the same gravity as an organ in Leipzig. The album Switched-on Bach wins 3 Grammys, soars up the charts, and suddenly the world understands electricity can cry, it can pray, it can be beautiful. You thought the synthesizer was about the future. No, it's about choice. The choice to give, not to hold back, to choose sound, not noise, to see a voice in the wires. And it's not magic, it's a decision, made in a garage, with a soldering iron in hand, and a belief that the world would listen. You hear fingers trembling. Not from fear, but from tension. 1968, New York. A small studio cluttered with Moog modules, wires tangled like the roots of an old oak. On the floor, a worn-out Bach score. Wendy Carlos isn't just tuning a VCO, she's negotiating with electrons. Each note is a separate act of faith. Engage the filter too early, the sound will suffocate. Hold the gate for a millisecond, the rhythm will break. And there's no undo button, only hands, only an ear. Only 3 weeks for one piece. She knows if she fails, the synthesizer will become noise in the corner again. But if she succeeds, the machine will speak, not in code, in prayer. Here's how she made it breathe. CV, control voltage, like a string's tension, higher voltage, higher note, gate, like a hammer striking a key, turns the sound on, turns it off. But Carlos didn't just press, she caressed the filter during recording, slowly, as if unfolding a pedal, so the sound didn't just play, it bloomed. It was like playing an organ, a violin, and a voice all at once, but without strings, without a reed, without lungs, only hands and will, and each take was a risk. Because the synthesizer remembered nothing. It lived only in the moment, like a human. The album came out. Switched-on Bach. 3 Grammys, a bestseller, Bach topping the charts on a machine that just a year before was called an amateur radio toy. But critics went wild. This isn't music, it's a mechanical mockery, they wrote. The irony? Their very fury proved the sound had touched them, truly. People don't argue about noise. They argue when their heart clenches, when tears fall on the score, when a machine made of circuit boards and solder makes you remember a church, childhood, loss, without a single string, without a single sigh. And here's the key point. Carlos didn't just play Bach. She proved that electronics could feel, not by itself, but through the person who poured tremor, fatigue, hope into it. You think it's about technology? No, it's about trust. Trust that even a cold transistor will respond if you give it a soul. Now the world knew the synthesizer wasn't deaf, it was listening. But who would take it from the studio into the fire of the stage? Who would dare to play a solo, knowing that the machine could fall silent at the most crucial moment? The answer came from rock, from smoke, sweat, and anger. Because now this instrument wasn't just smart, it was ready for battle. And its first warrior was someone who believed even a machine can cry if you teach it. London, 1970. An Emerson, Lake and Palmer concert. The hall is packed. Smoke, sweat, anticipation. On stage, Keith Emerson. In front of him, a black box on a tripod, battered, scratched from touring cases. It's a Minimoog, the first true synthesizer that could be picked up and brought on stage, like a guitar. The audience whispers, "What is it? A new amplifier? A device from Mars?" Emerson presses a key, and a howl erupts from the speakers, as if a spaceship is tearing through the atmosphere. The hall freezes, not from shock, from recognition. This sound, it's inside you. It hits your solar plexus. But Emerson himself is trembling, not from drama, from fear. He knows the Minimoog could glitch at any moment, overheat, degrade to noise, fall silent, because it's not a digital toy. It's analog, alive, unstable, like a human before a confession. And every risk is art. The Minimoog Model D changed the game. Before, a synthesizer was a maze of wires, circuit boards, hours of tuning. Now, everything was internal. VCO, VCF, VCA, already connected as if Moog himself had played it. Turn it on, press a key. Sound emerged, no patch cables, no prayers to transistors, just music. And that knob, glide, not just a function, It's tears on glass, a smooth transition from note to note, impossible on a piano, alien to a guitar. But in Lucky Man, it turns the solo into a confession. You don't hear notes, you feel a fall. You heard it. You didn't know where it came from. Now you know. And here's where it gets interesting. That very glide, it still sounds today. In Daft Punk, where it makes robots sound human. In Hans Zimmer, where every note pulls you to the edge of an abyss. In The Weeknd, where melancholy dances in a strobe light. One controller, one turn of a knob, and eternity. Because some ideas don't age, they just wait until the world is ready to hear them again. By 1975, 13,000 Minimoogs had traveled the world, not as instruments, as voices. Now the synthesizer isn't in the corner of a studio, it's on stage, in the center of the fire. Rock stars adore it, because it gives something no other instrument has, a sound that hasn't existed yet. You can create a voice that has never been heard on Earth, and that is freedom. From Liverpool to Dusseldorf, from the Beatles to Kraftwerk, music seeking the future always listens to Moog, especially when that future beats in your chest, like a heart, like a pulse, like a first cry inside. The Void, 1969, Abbey Road, dust on a wooden crate from America. Inside, not an instrument, a challenge. Paul McCartney pokes a finger at a Moog module, searching for a sound for Maxwell's Silver Hammer. George grunts, a toy for engineers. But then he turns it on, and something like bells from Mars rings in the studio, pure, but with a slight tremor, as if an electron is afraid to break free. John Lennon, always cynical, suddenly smiles. It's magic. And there it is, the turning point, not in technology, in culture. If the Beatles accepted it, the world would follow, especially when that sound started pouring from every radio like rain after a drought. But listen closely. Rockers didn't replace the piano with the synthesizer. They used it as paint, like watercolors for sound. Pink Floyd for fog. In Dark Side of the Moon, the Moog filter turns white noise into melancholy, as if someone is crying beyond the horizon. Kraftwerk for rhythm. Their waves sharp like robot steps on concrete. And the Beatles for play, for surprise. In Here Comes the Sun, the synthesizer doesn't sing, it laughs. And that's the main thing. It didn't dictate what to do. It asked, what do you want to say? It was a mirror, not a teacher. That's why it fit into jazz, pop, psychedelia, into any music where there's room for a tremor in the voice. And now, a number that will make your jaw drop. In 1965, 0% of hits contained electronics, not one. 8 years later, 80%, not slow growth, an explosion. In one generation, the synthesizer went from a garage to global airwaves, and it all started not with a corporation, not with a memo, but with one person who believed electricity can sing, if you give it a soul. And here, the paradox. When digital came, everyone thought, analog will die, sterile chips will replace noisy transistors, but the opposite happened. The world suddenly remembered what real sound smelled like, warm, unstable, with a slight hiss, like the breath of someone sleeping. It's not perfect, and that's why. It's alive. You've heard it, in Daft Punk, in Hans Zimmer, in that track that made you stop on the street. You didn't know it was Moog, now you do. Because this sound, it's not technology, it's a pulse, and it's still beating. Imagine a studio in Brooklyn. At the console, a guy in a worn hoodie. On the monitor, hundreds of virtual synthesizers, each more precise, cleaner, faster than the last. But he scrubs the track again and again, frowning. The sound is perfect. And dead. Like a glossy magazine photo, everything in place, but no tremor, no pulse. Then he stumbles upon a Daft Punk solo, the bass from Star Wars, the hum in a Flume track, and realizes beneath that sheen, it's the same sound, warm, unstable, alive. He Googles it and sees the name, Moog. In the 2010s, thousands like him are buying rusty boxes from garage sales. 1970s Minimoog Model D with peeling paint and cracked knobs for $5,000. Not for the functions, for the noise, for the tremor, for the fact that the machine breathes. Why does analog sound alive? Not magic, physics. Digital synthesis is a perfect sine wave, smooth as glass. But Moog's analog is a circuit of resistors, capacitors, transistors that age, heat up, make noise. There's always chaos in them, microscopic. Voltage fluctuations, thermal noise, nonlinearities. And when you turn the volume knob, the sound doesn't just get louder. It blooms, like a voice when shouting, like a trumpet at forte. You can't fool the brain. It feels the difference between a living face and its photo. One is data, the other is breath. And here's the irony that makes your fingers tingle. Robert Moog never patented his ladder filter, the very one that made the sound soft, pulsating, almost human. He simply published the schematic in a magazine, gave it away, for free. Competitors copied it within a week. But that's precisely why the Moog sound became the language of all electronic music. Today, plugins spend millions of CPU cycles to simulate that very filter, a schematic that could have been redrawn over a cup of coffee. Moog gave up billions to give the world a language, and the world still speaks it, from Hans Zimmer to The Weeknd. But how did this sound learn to talk to other machines? How did synthesizers suddenly understand each other? The answer isn't in the sound, but in the signal. Moog initially used CV gate, voltage as a note, pulse as a hit. Then came MIDI, the universal language of machines. And then the synthesizer stopped being just an instrument. It became a voice in an orchestra of wires. You thought it was about sound. No, it's about connection. And you hear it every time goosebumps run down your skin from a bass that seems to know your name. You think your Ableton is just software. No, it's the descendant of negotiations in a smoky hotel room in Los Angeles, 1981, NAMM conference. At the table, engineers from Roland, Yamaha, Sequential Circuits, cigars, sweat. A silence stretched taut like a string. Everyone knows their synthesizers don't talk to each other. Want to connect a Moog to a TR-808 drum machine? Solder an adapter, pray to transistors, hope the noise doesn't shift the pitch by half a tone. Chaos, fragmentation, music held captive by brands. But 5 years before that, Robert Moog had already provided the answer. CV, gate, not a protocol, a philosophy, voltage as a note, pulse as a breath, and most importantly, he didn't patent it, he simply gave it away. As a language, not as a lock. And so the Japanese took this idea and translated it into digital. MIDI was born, musical instrument digital interface, not as a product but as a letter. In it, the spirit of Moog, instruments should serve musicians, not the other way around. Look here, MIDI turns a note into a message, a number from 0 to 127, velocity, duration, even modulation tremor. Now you're not just playing, you're writing music like text, editing, rewriting, sending. A drummer controls an orchestra. A teenager in a garage creates a soundtrack to their life on a Commodore 64. All of this because one person refused to own the language. Imagine the alternative. Moog patented CV, gate, or Roland patented MIDI. Then your Novation keyboard wouldn't work with Ableton. There would be no GarageBand, no FL Studio. Electronics would remain an elitist toy like professional cameras before USB. But Moog chose trust, not control, and his ethics became the foundation of digital music. MIDI outlived Betamax, minidisc, even floppy disks. Today it flies over Bluetooth LE, but the essence is the same. Dialogue. Started in Seoul, a garage in Trumansburg. And here's the question that hits you in the solar plexus. If everything is data, where is the soul? The answer isn't in the schematics. It's in the fingers, in those who taught the machine to cry. Because even the most digital sound touches you, when behind it is a person who knows technology not for its own sake, for your sake. You heard it. You didn't know where it came from. Now you know. Every time you press a key, you are speaking a language born in smoke, sweat, and faith. London, 1972. Rain drums on the club roof. On stage, a Minimoog Model D. Keys cracked from sweat, the casing rattles like an old refrigerator. The musician touches a key, and a sound erupts from the speakers, not bass, not sine, but something alive. The growl of a beast in a basement, the cry of a child in an empty apartment, a prayer in a ruined cathedral. In the hall, silence, then tears. Not from the melody, from the timbre, from how the filter trembles with manual modulation, how the bass pulsates with a 0.8 resonance, how the sound seems to breathe with microscopic fluctuations born from the aging of capacitors. You heard it. You didn't know where it came from. Now you know it's not a machine. It's a voice. Why is this defect so touching? Because living things are never perfect. Moog's analog drifts, the temperature in the studio, a voltage spike, the age of the electrolyte in the capacitors, everything introduces chaos, and this chaos makes each note unique. In digital, perfect repetition. In analog, never. Even on the same synthesizer, even on the same day, the sound will be slightly different. The brain feels this. A perfect sine is an equation. But when the wave trembles, hisses, tires, it becomes like a voice, and a voice is always human. And here, science confirms intuition. Neuroscientists from MIT and McGill University scanned the brains of listeners, and they found analog noise in the 20 to 200 hertz range, where Moog bass presses on the chest, activates the insular cortex and anterior cingulate gyrus, the very areas responsible for empathy and bodily perception. Not melody, not rhythm, but precisely the background noise, drift, instability. This isn't poetry, it's physiology. Moog didn't know about neurons, but he knew for a machine to sing, it must breathe. Look here, Moog didn't create an instrument. He created a being, not through code, not through schematics, but through a refusal of control. He allowed the machine to be unstable, allowed it to age, allowed it to make mistakes. And in this, the paradox, the less perfect his machine was, the more human it became. You feel it in your body, not in your ears, in your solar plexus, in the goosebumps on your skin, because a sound that trembles is a sound that lives, and it's still speaking, right now, through every track where the bass doesn't just hit, but breathes. It all started in a garage in Trumansburg, not with a presentation, not with a patent, but with a soldering iron, smoke, and a man who couldn't play any instrument. Robert Moog, a physicist, engineer, a quiet rebel in a short-sleeved shirt, just wanted sound to be able to tremble, not like a machine, like a human standing on the edge of confession. He built the first modular synthesizer for composer Herbert Deutsch, who dreamed of sounds without a name. Then Wendy Carlos took this machine and made it pray, through Bach. The album Switched-on Bach became the first gold record of electronic music, not an experiment, a hit, proof electricity can cry. And then, the Minimoog, 1970, not a laboratory, a stage. Keith Emerson brings it under the spotlights like a sword. The sound tears through the air, not bass, not sine, but the cry of a creature not yet known to nature. 3 years later, 80% of hits on the charts feature Moog, not an imitation, a true analog with its noise, drift, breath. Giorgio Moroder builds a disco empire on it. Kraftwerk turns it into the voice of the future. And all of this because one person didn't lock his schematic in a safe. MIDI came later and connected machines into one language. Digital tried to bury analog in the 80s, but the world suddenly remembered perfect sound is dead, and living sound hisses. Today, Hans Zimmer, Kanye West, Radiohead, they all speak the language born in a garage. You hear it in every track where the bass doesn't just hit, but embraces. You didn't know where it came from. Now you know. Robert Moog died in 2005, not a billionaire, not a star, just a man with a brain full of schematics and a heart full of sound. He lost the brand but not the idea. He didn't wear suits. He didn't give interviews. He just soldered and believed. His synthesizers stand in MoMA, in London studios, in Moscow garages, and they sound as if they were just assembled, because they don't age, they live. Here's the trick. Moog didn't invent an instrument. He wrote a poem in the language of resistors and capacitors, each circuit board, a stanza, each transistor, a word. He didn't think about the market. He thought about a wave that wanted to cry, and in this, a lesson for everyone who builds something new. If there's no soul, it will be a gadget. If there is, it will become art. As he once said, "I'm not an inventor, I just help sound find its voice." And now, your turn. We live in a world where AI composes tracks and apps generate beats in seconds. But what's behind it? Cold mathematics or a new form of humanity? Does technology make music colder or more human? Write in the comments, cold or soul. And remember, even the smartest algorithm doesn't know how to make a filter sigh until a human stands behind it. You hear that sound? It's inside you, and it's still alive.